Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Correnti, and I'm privileged to be the Executive Vice President at CFAM. And today, CFAM experts will look at UN agencies and how these agencies have taken a hard left turn, promoting controversial issues in development and humanitarian assistance. This includes promoting abortion around the world in countries where it's illegal or highly restricted. It also includes programs that contribute to the sexualization of children, the promotion of LGBT issues, support for the decriminalization of prostitution, something that will fuel the sex trade, increase trafficking, and put women and girls at risk. When most people think of UN agencies, they think of important organizations set up to promote peace and development, to cater to the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. And this may have been the case with many UN agencies for much of the history of the United Nations. Think of Unicef, the UN Agency for Children, which was set up to help hundreds of thousands of orphaned and refugee children in the wake of the Second World War. UN agencies are well funded. They receive billions of dollars annually from Western countries, from the European Union, from Nordic countries. And because of this, these countries, as well as rich foundations like the Gates Foundation, they wield a lot of influence on the directions of the programs. Regrettably, eradicating maternal deaths, prioritizing education for girls, and ending unnecessary deaths of children from lack of clean water and sanitation have taken a backseat to abortion, contraception, and the promotion of sexual rights. So to discuss this today, I have my colleagues at CFAM, Rebecca Oes, who is the Director of Research, and our legal expert, Stefano Generini, who's our Vice President of Legal Studies, and Alexis Fragosa, who joined CFAM just 4 months ago and who is our Director of Government Relations. And before we begin, if you would like to pose any questions, I ask you to please use the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we can. So let's get started. Why don't we start with the basics? Stefano, why don't you tell us a little bit about the various UN agencies, their role is what, as well as what guides their work.
So there are 14 specialized UN agencies, as well as 6 special funds and programs set up to address discrete issues. There are agencies that deal with drugs, crime, with the environment, with conservation, the World Food Program, health, women's issues, et cetera, et cetera. These agencies have been created over the years since the founding of the United Nations to address specific issues. And generally speaking, they were founded to address one specific issue. You already mentioned UNICEF. UNICEF, for example, was founded to address the crisis of orphaned and refugee children after the Second World War. But it transitioned eventually as the issue of orphan children after the Second World War faded. It transitioned to being a permanent agency to help address the needs and well-being of children around the world. And we see a similar thing with many UN agencies. They were originally founded to address discrete issues, but they gradually expand their competence to deal with more and more issues. And we have seen this certainly with all UN agencies. And sadly, it has also meant that many UN agencies have been able to expand their competence to also promote controversial social agendas.
So Rebecca, tell us a little bit about where UN agencies get their marching orders and how they're governed.
Sure. So the primary place that these agencies get their mandates from is the projects and the programming that is agreed to by the UN member states, who of course form the General Assembly. So for example, the most recent thing would be the Sustainable Development Goals, and that program, which was launched in 2015. And the agencies, sort of help coordinate the UN's efforts in their specific issue areas. The UN agencies are in fact bound by the negotiated resolutions of the UN in ways that the member states often are not. And the agencies also have usually executive boards made up of people from diplomats from around the world that are supposed to coordinate their work. And there's an overarching executive board made up of the heads of all these agencies that's meant to help them coordinate amongst each other. As far as their funding, The agencies typically receive funding that is assessed, which is to say that countries are supposed to donate a certain amount to those agencies' budgets based on their wealth and population. But these agencies also receive voluntary funds, and the funds also are completely funded through voluntary contributions, which can come from UN member states, but also from other donors. And of course, sometimes these voluntary funds can be earmarked for specific projects that the donors want these agencies to carry out.
And I'll just say that a lot of the controversial work that the UN agencies do is precisely because of voluntary funding through the United Nations. UN agencies, like most bureaucracies, are governed by a lot of inertia. So they will only take up an issue if there is a political some political will or some political actor driving that agenda. And we have seen a lot of voluntary funding to promote, in particular, LGBT issues, sexual and reproductive health, a code word here at the United Nations for abortion, as well as other controversial subjects. It's one of those issues that is very hot politically in Western countries, in Nordic countries, in Europe, in the United States, Canada, et cetera, who fund a lot of work of UN agencies. And therefore, there is an incentive for the agencies also to promote these controversial issues, not just when they're directly being funded, but also in a way to pander to the donor countries in order to sort of let them know and signal to them that they are on board with the agenda.
Another thing too, if I could just interject, is that these agencies work off of the main pillars of the UN system, one of which is human rights. And so a large part of where they derive their mandates as they interpret them comes from the UN's human rights system, which is not an agency unto itself, but a lot of the most controversial aspects are coming from experts, often appointed, not elected, within the human rights system, and the agencies then take up that language and insert it into their work, even though this is obviously not a mandate coming from the General Assembly. And, as I mentioned too, these agencies are designed to coordinate well with each other, which means that what starts in one place often spreads throughout the entire system. They will be quoting the human rights system and each other. And so it's hard to keep the more controversial elements from bleeding from one agency to another.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say that you can't really call what the UN human rights system does a mandate for UN agencies. I think you would have to say that UN agencies give teeth to the non-binding recommendations and suggestions that are coming out of the human rights system. For those who don't know, the human rights system is a constellation of UN experts, committees, bodies, mostly in Geneva, who comment and make recommendations to countries on what their human rights obligations are. And they do this routinely. There's a myriad of them. There's about 50 special procedures, which are UN experts, plus 10 treaty bodies, and many other working groups and committees. And they very often will come out with quite wacky and extravagant opinions about human rights, including decriminalizing prostitution, saying that abortion is a human right, saying that children should be allowed to access hormonal treatment to transition to being a person of the other sex from the one that they were born biologically. So these are all things that we are seeing. These are the wacky opinions coming from the human rights system, and most member states will not pay attention to them at all, ever, because they're non-binding, because the UN human rights system was not set up to create a binding process like that. But what happens is you have UN agencies who administer conjointly over $25 billion a year in foreign assistance, and work together with other foreign agencies bilaterally in developing how foreign assistance is used. And so what they do is they incorporate the human rights opinions, these non-binding human rights opinions that countries would otherwise ignore, into their own work. And in this way, they make those human rights opinions more influential than they ever should be.
And some of these so-called experts, I guess they are experts in their field, or you would think they would be to receive this appointment, are controversial figures. I think about the special rapporteur for the rights of health, who penned an op-ed in Teen Vogue saying that girls should aspire to be sex workers, which is completely outrageous. So who appoints these special rapporteurs? Where does that come from?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not so directly related to UN agencies, only in the sense that UN agencies take their work and replicate it. But you will see that there's a lot of the same countries that are funding both the special rapporteur system, the UN human rights system, as well as the UN agencies, because they know that there's a lot of synergy there. They know that if they push an issue through the human rights bodies, and then if they push it also through the UN agencies, they will be able to create sort of an echo chamber to expand their influence. And they do that very effectively, including by funding and sort of lobbying for the selection of these specific figures as these UN experts. And that's not just the only controversial UN special procedure. There have been many over the years, but we have to say that, yes, the current rapporteur for health is a particularly contentious figure, since she has been not only an abortionist, but also an advocate for sexual rights, and then that's all she's ever done. So it's quite controversial that the rapporteur for health, for all aspects of health globally, is actually an abortionist.
And I think so we could perhaps just summarize this by saying that, the most crazy things that are said by bureaucrats that no one need pay attention to, what the UN agencies do is they translate that into direct funding for policies and boots on the ground. So the reason why countries end up needing to care about these people's opinions is because the agencies are carrying them out in real time.
Mm-hmm. Each summer, CFAM follows, as we are all very aware, the development of the strategic plans for UN Women and UNFPA, Unicef. And each year, these agencies push for controversial language in these strategic plans. This year is no different. Stefano, can you tell us a little bit about these plans, why they're important, and what role member states have?
Yeah, so this is also another interesting aspect of how UN agencies function, especially in recent years. Those who are familiar with the United Nations and UN social debates generally will know that abortion is not an international right. LGBT issues are not internationally recognized as human rights. These are controversial issues that are very much debated internationally. But UN donor countries, which are mostly, for the most part, Western liberal democracies, who are promoting these issues, are very frustrated that they can't get the General Assembly, for example, or the Economic and Social Council to agree to promote these issues in UN policy. And so they have to be creative in ways that they get the UN system or the UN bureaucracy and agencies to promote these issues. And one of the ways that they've done so in recent years is the development of these strategic plans, which are basically, they're not necessary. For many years, for decades, UN agencies operated without strategic plans. They simply followed the directions of UN member states, which of course don't include promoting abortion and LGBT issues and all these controversial things. But because the donors haven't been able to do it through the official channels, they have now devised these strategic plans so that every UN agency is now creating these strategic plans to govern their own internal policy and program development. So what we'll often find in these strategic plans is elements, these controversial elements that would never appear in a UN resolution or wouldn't be approved in a UN resolution. And so, that's what we're contending with in some ways, or even the strategic plans will simply only concentrate on some aspects of UN agreements without preserving the political balance that is generally reached in UN agreements in the General Assembly or the Economic and Social Council. So in some ways, the UN agencies are replacing the guidance they receive from UN member states in the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council through these internal planning documents like the strategic plans and internal frameworks to measure progress on their policies.
So let's take a closer look at specific examples. CFAM has been monitoring the work of the agencies for 24 years. And given that this webinar is just an hour, there's only a little bit that we can get into. So I would encourage you to go to our website. You'll find thousands of articles in our research there. But for right now, why don't we look at the World Health Organization. We've written quite a bit on how WHO used the opportunity of the pandemic to promote abortion. Rebecca, please tell us a little bit about how generally the WHO has contributed to pushing abortion on the developing world, as well as what actions they took during the pandemic.
Sure. So the World Health Organization obviously is the UN's health oriented agency that, it was designed to provide guidance for best practices in the medical field, as well as to coordinate response to global health emergencies like pandemics, and to coordinate, childhood vaccinations and the like. They have been, initially sort of under the guise of addressing the problem of unsafe abortion. That is to say, women who are injured or killed through botched abortion practices. They have sort of flipped that on its head to promote quote unquote safe abortion. And so, coming up with medical guidance and technical guidance for doctors in order to, reduce the unsafety. Of course, one of the things they would say is that, a critical barrier to quote unquote safe abortion is laws that restrict it or prohibit it. And so right there, what we run into is some tension, because there is no human right to abortion. In general, the World Health Organization has gone about this in several different ways. One is by sort of having a loose definition of what unsafe abortion is. Often it's treated as if illegal equals unsafe, but increasingly as the the predominant method of abortion has shifted from surgical to medical, that is to say pills, they have been increasingly promoting abortions that are taking place in contexts where it is illegal, particularly in Latin America, through the use of pills, as safe as long as it's done in accordance with their technical guidance, which they then provide. And so in a certain sense, what they're doing is pushing against laws against abortion as being a driver of unsafe abortion, while at the same time trying to ensure that abortion is widely accessible, even where it is still illegal. And so in this way, they're providing sort of medical cover for groups that distribute, for example, online or through black market channels, abortion-causing drugs. And these groups can then say, well, we're just doing this in accordance with UN guidance, with WHO guidance. And they've also really worked to expand the provider base, essentially. So saying, not just doctors, but also nurses, midwives, pharmacists can all be involved in providing abortions, again, to maximize the number of people who are involved. And while doing that, the WHO has also issued guidance saying that if a person who could be a provider has a conscientious objection, that essentially, unless they can provide a timely referral, they must participate in the abortion, which obviously is a violation of their conscience rights. And so
even the referral may be a violation of their conscience rights.
Correct.
And the guidance from UN agencies, from all UN agencies conjointly, in a manual on reproductive health in crises and emergencies, is that health providers in emergencies, humanitarian emergencies, we're talking about countries that have been ravaged by war or natural disasters, any health provider in these situations may not object to referring women for abortion, according to their conscience.
Right. So they offer both technical and policy guidance. And, most recently, the WHO has started assembling a database of countries' laws, what types of restrictions exist in order to help, push against that. Later this year, we expect they're going to issue their latest update to their safe abortion guidance, which I'm sure will, further erode whatever protections exist within the medical system for life in the womb. Most recently, during the COVID pandemic, they have taken the opportunity to encourage countries to expand the ability of women to self-induce abortions under the heading of sort of self-care practices. And, so for example, that women should be able to receive pills through the mail, through telemedicine. They shouldn't have to necessarily see a doctor at all. And many countries, particularly in the West, have taken this on board at the very least as an emergency response to the pandemic. But of course, the WHO is, working hard to build an evidence base to suggest that these things should not be rolled back once the pandemic is over. The WHO has also issued sort of general guidances about how health systems should prioritize services, and they've been very adamant that "quote unquote" sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion, should be regarded as as an essential thing to continue doing during the pandemic.
I'll point out to one fact that the World Health Organization, right at the beginning of the pandemic, we're talking about March 2020, when it issued its first ever guidance on how to deal with COVID, with the respiratory complications from COVID-19. In that guidance, they were already promoting abortion, and they were already promoting reproductive health, sexual reproductive health services, comprehensive sexual reproductive health services, which includes abortion, of course, as essential, and that women's choices should not be impaired during the pandemic. So it's a very high priority, even in a case of emergency, and a rapid evolving emergency like COVID in 2020. It's such a high priority that it found its way into the first ever guidance on how to address COVID.
So what does that look like on the ground? I mean, how is the funding coming to allow these implementing organizations gaining a foothold on the ground to be able to do this abortion work? Can anybody comment on that? I'm thinking of like the family planning money. Family planning money, for example, that comes from, we know the US is the largest bilateral funder of overseas family planning. This current Congress wants to raise it to some $760 million. And we know that during the Trump years, they implemented the Mexico City policy, as other Republican administrations have, so that that money can't go to any organization that does abortion. I'm just thinking about how we've sort of created a giant, International Planned Parenthood Federation is now a giant. They're also a formal partner of UN agencies. I mean, would you say that it's this family planning money that's allowing these problematic organizations to gain a foothold in these countries and to cause problems?
I would say a couple of things to that. One is that, yes, certainly it is hard to find large organizations carrying out family planning work that don't also include the promotion and provision of abortion as part of their work. So that's just a massive problem in the international family planning movement. The other thing too, with regard to the US, is that certainly the Mexico City policy applies to foreign-based NGOs that promote or provide abortion. It does not apply to multilateral organizations like UN agencies. And so in effect, if we fund the United Nations Population Fund or UNFPA to do family planning work, they can then go and partner with the International Planned Parenthood Federation and its affiliates. And essentially it sort of whitewashes or launders that money and makes it so that the US's safeguards no longer apply.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Why don't we move to UNICEF? In May, UNICEF published a controversial report that said pornography may not be harmful to children, and in some cases may even make them happy. CFAM was greatly alarmed, as were hundreds of child protection groups who penned a letter to the executive director of UNICEF, asking them to re-examine the huge amounts of research that demonstrate the harm pornography has on children. We followed this closely. Alexis, you were our point on this. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about this?
Right, Lisa. So in May, UNICEF issued a report which said that there was no conclusive evidence that children exposed to pornography were harmed. To support that assertion, they cited an EU study which found that most children who saw pornographic images or sexually explicit content were neither happy nor unhappy after viewing that content. I would say that the purpose of this report, interestingly, was an evaluation of e-tools which protect children from viewing harmful content online by verifying ages to prevent them from seeing the content. And so UNICEF's evaluation essentially was that, well, if the content is not harming children, that is to say, if they are not feeling happy or unhappy or experiencing some kind of trauma from viewing sexually explicit material, then perhaps it is a violation of their right to information, their right to privacy, to view this sexually explicit content, which perhaps could be educational. In fact, the report notably stated that some children, that is young children, but also adolescents, that they seek out sexually explicit material for the purpose of learning about the changes in their body during puberty, but also as a way for them to explore their gender identity. It seems that this is sort of an alarming trend with UNICEF and with other UN agencies where they're promoting what is termed comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. And that this CSE does in fact include sexually explicit material. And so this report implicitly defends their position that, well, some porn is appropriate. And the pornography that we deem to be appropriate is, oh, incidentally, the sexually explicit material that we have created. It's a program for comprehensive sexuality education. So they seem to be working with one another to promote this idea that, again, that pornography and or sexually explicit content does not harm children, and that it can help them in determining their gender identity.
Now, when CFAM wrote its first report, UNICEF took down the initial report and it made some changes. Can you speak to that, please?
They did remove the report initially, and they revised it very strategically to exclude the conclusory statement that pornography is not always harmful to children. But in reality, the bulk of the report remained the same. They doubled down on their assertion that children were neither happy nor upset after viewing this content, and that some of this content is educational insofar as it helps children understand themselves as their bodies are changing and forming their gender identity, that is choosing whether they're male or female, or choosing whether they identify with their masculinity or femininity, and other aspects of this new ideology, which claims that that sex is not any longer tethered to your biology, but is rather something that is chosen. They really didn't seem to divert or change the conclusion of the report at all. They maintained that it was the same. And subsequently, we reported that they didn't make a change to the report, and they removed the report again, this time permanently. I would also note that as part of our investigation, we did make inquiries into donors to UNICEF, namely USAID, and UNICEF's response was that we do not promote anything that would harm children, but again, failed to say explicitly that pornography does in fact harm children. And so they essentially refused to provide a substantive response.
I'll just say that one of the things that I found most troubling about that report, I mean, aside from the fact of saying that, children have a right to access pornography, and that countries that interfere with their right to access pornography are somehow in violation of human rights, which is preposterous on its face. I find that it's somehow the UNICEF this report, which, you know, it's written by these researchers who work for UNICEF, and it has the UNICEF logo, and then it has a little tiny disclaimer on the second page saying this does not represent the official position of UNICEF, of course, but you know, trying to explain it to anybody who reads the report, and it's very hard to understand. But in any case, what I found most shocking is that this isn't the first time UNICEF does this, right? This is the official, in some ways, it's the official position of UNICEF. UNICEF was one of the preparers of a document called the Luxembourg Guidelines, which argues, amongst other things, of course, that, you know, teenagers should be able to access pornography because it's good for them and it's good for their development. It's a guideline on the protection of children from also child pornography, from trafficking and things like that. And it's very troubling in many ways, but this was one of the aspects of it that I found most troubling. Of course, it's promoting the use of pornography for teenagers, for children. And it also, in ways, it arguably also attempts to lower the standard for protection of minors from things like child pornography, sexting, and things like that. So, you know, UNICEF has been engaged in these controversial issues for many years. I remember even in 2014, they issued a position paper arguing that, you know, children should be able to, you know, decide their own gender. And this was, you know, many years ago already. So I wasn't so much surprised by it, but I'm glad that that we are getting more traction. People are becoming more aware. I mean, the fact that UNICEF had to pull the report is great progress.
So Alexis touched on some of the problematic elements that come through comprehensive sexuality education. There are other areas that CSE has come into UN agencies. Could anyone talk about a couple of those examples?
So the UN agencies jointly issued a guidance. This was already now, I think it was 2008, the first one, on comprehensive sexuality education, which was very controversial. And they revamped it in 2018 and reissued it. This guidance on comprehensive sexuality education is highly controversial, and it has like a recommended curricula for all different age groups with regards to comprehensive sexuality education. And, you know, it recommends teaching children as young as five about masturbation, about diverse families, about the ability of choosing their own gender, about diverse sexual orientations. It invites children to experiment sexually. So very troubling. It even says that, you know, children should be taught that they have a right to a safe and sexual life, and that they don't have to disclose their HIV status to their partners. These are the sort of really wacky, controversial things that comprehensive sexuality education has, and it's right there in the official document of the UN agencies promulgating this. So we've gone to a point where UN agencies are even now publishing, you know, reports on the comprehensive sexuality education that they're carrying out in countries. UNICEF published a report in 2016 about the comprehensive sexuality education programming in Thailand, and it includes explicit sexual images drawn by children, because that's what they're having the children do in classrooms. Draw a sexually explicit image about phalluses, condoms. Really something shocking. It's in the UNICEF report. I'm not inventing this. So this is really quite something that has progressed way beyond what most people even know and understand. And it's quite shocking when people first actually see it.
I think it's important to note, Lisa, that even though a lot of these UN policies are promoted in places where the UN has more traction, like least developing nations, Latin America and Africa, Southeast Asia, that these big ideas, especially this idea about gender identity and the comprehensive sexuality education, that they are picked up here by some of the more progressive, left-wing progressive states. That is, in California, they have mandated in public schools the comprehensive sexuality education, exactly as Stefano has described previously. It's very difficult to obtain an exemption, to excuse your child from participating in this. It's not just California, it's New York also. And we have seen, even where parents have grouped together to fight the local school board and say that they don't want this education for their children, that it's their kids, this is their community, they don't want it, the school board will still unanimously vote in favor of adopting this CSE. And a good example of that would be in Santa Barbara, where they had a huge coalition of parents who were fighting against it. And the school board still voted in favor of including it in their curriculum for the public school students.
Thanks, Alexis. Let's move to UN Women. We still have 20 minutes, but we have a big agenda to get through. So UN Women is tasked with the important role of advancing the rights of women around the world. Yet they are often embroiled in controversy and are constantly needing to be reined in by member states for venturing outside their mandate, for pushing LGBT issues and abortion on traditional countries. Just last week, we reported how they are discouraging the use of the word women to accommodate biological males. Alexis, you wrote that story. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Oh, yeah. So last week, actually, UN Women retweeted some guidelines for individuals who follow them, advising them on how to think and how to speak and how to act. And one of their suggestions was discouraging the use of the word woman, discouraging the use of the word man, and because it offends and or excludes non-binary persons or people who perceive themselves as non-binary. And I think this is indicative of the UN Women's identity crisis, that they are somehow claiming that they are going to empower women and that they're promoting women, and yet they're, on the other hand, they're also asserting that there is no biological difference between men and women, and that a biological male that views himself as a woman is accepted as part of their ranks and is quote unquote a UN woman. So I think that what we're finding with UN Women is that it's sort of exemplifies what's going on in the greater scheme of the third wave feminist movement. That is, there really is a break between these two ideas about whether and how they can promote, justifiably or truly promote biological women who are suffering in certain countries, who don't have access to education, who are not free to engage in commerce, or are not protected by law in the equal way that biological males are. How can we claim to be doing that while at the same time state that transgender women are women, and sort of really conflate two or three different things together, making it altogether confusing and not clear what the agenda is going to be. And so I see that with UN Women in particular, that it's really, really struggling with its identity insofar as it claims to be working for women, but is really confused about whether or not women truly exist. And if they do exist, whether that is determined biologically or whether that is just something that you choose.
Agency that dare not speak its name.
Right.
I would agree with you, Alexis. I do think it's an identity crisis is a right way of putting it. I can't believe that they can't even come down on the right side of whether prostitution should be decriminalized or not. It's just appalling.
That's right. You know that UN Women, they actually said that they were going to take a neutrality stance on this issue, but they keep using the word sex work, which is a term that has been, created to normalize prostitution as a kind of legitimate profession. and one of the things that I think is most controversial about UN Women, of course, is that it's an agency that, unlike other traditional UN agencies and funds and programs, it doesn't do much traditional aid. It's not providing food, shelter, sanitation, health, basic services that are necessary. Like most other UN agencies and programs, it really does very little of that. Most all its money is invested in lobbying activities, whether it's training advocates in poorer countries, NGOs, and partnering with them and teaching them the new ways of woke feminism, or even training politicians in countries. That's a lot of their focus. They're lobbying. They're like a gigantic international woke lobbying agency. So UN Women really is very controversial. And of course, then there's the other role that UN Women has in the context of intergovernmental negotiations, because UN Women doesn't just lobby around the world. It doesn't just have offices in just about every country or region in the world. It also has a really influential role in the context of negotiations between UN member states here at the United Nations, because UN Women acts as the secretariat, for example, for the Commission on the Status of Women, which is the annual conference on women's issues here at the United Nations under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council, as well as it provides secretarial support for just about all UN resolutions having to do with issues about women. So their normative influence is very big globally, as well as here at the United Nations, and their agenda and their program is very confused.
I think, Stefano, a good example of that would be the invention of this, instead of saying that it's violence against women and all these programming to assist women who have suffered some at the hands of some domestic violence or violence in war, is that they're changing it to gender-based violence. And so they're essentially eliminating programming that is designed to assist women and opening it up so that it doesn't just assist women any longer. It's gender-based violence. And so it's really for women, but also for, again, men who identify as women or asexual minorities. So someone who is gay or lesbian. And so they are essentially, a lot of their programming, because of this tension between the LGBT agenda and the women's agenda, because they're at odds with one another, what we find is that funds that are truly needed by women in crisis, women and girls in crisis, are being diverted away from women and girls to other programming that is not specifically for women and girls.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that, people like Dale O'Leary and other pioneers in the pro-life, pro-family movement in the 80s and 90s, they were warning about the use of the term gender in international policies and domestic policies. Nobody seemed to be listening to them, because the term gender was just adopted in international policies in the 1995, and it's part of the mandate of UN Women. But what we are seeing the agencies more and more do is use the term gender as not just referring to men and women, but the term gender as referring to the panoply. It's an open definition of gender, any kind of gender that you want. And so one of the first things that I discovered when I came to the United Nations about 10 years ago was this shift away from terminology against violence against women to fight violence against women to a new term called gender-based violence. And I was shocked that even within the United Nations, some UN human rights experts on women were concerned about this. They were saying, why are we shifting away from women to this new term, away from violence against women, which is a term which has, we're talking about 40, 50 years of laws and policies to address violence against women that have been effective. We have templates, we have data, we have measurements. It's objective. It's based on the status of a woman as a woman and violence against her. So it's a very victim-focused approach. And so we shifted from that violence against women approach, which is a victim-based approach, which is objective, to a gender-based violence approach, which is subjective entirely. It has to do with the intention of the perpetrator of the violence. So, and moreover, it's because it has to be gender-based violence. Moreover, it has to do with much more than just violence against women, because it's any kind of violence based on gender. And if gender, of course, there's an open definition of gender, then this is how UN agencies, as well as other international agencies like the US Agency for International Development, as well as the UK Agency for International Development, the German Agency for International Development, all these wealthy donor countries define gender-based violence in their own programs and policies as including violence on the basis of LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, all these issues. And this is not to condone violence on the basis of LGBT. We condemn all forms of violence, including violence against individuals who identify as LGBT. But we're talking here about mission creep and using an agenda that is well established and well consensual at the United Nations on women to promote something that is actually quite not consensual and isn't agreed and isn't well defined at all. So we know exactly what violence against women is. We know how to address it. We know the laws that need to be implemented and the policies needed to tackle it. On the other hand, when we're talking about LGBT policies, we really don't know what we're talking about. It's even very hard to define, LGBT or sexual orientation and gender identity as discrete categories. And yet UN Women and other agencies are adopting these terms in their own lexicon and in their own internal policies as if they were internationally agreed and well established scientifically or legally.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that the dilution of the term and the funds has definitely prevented more progress on eliminating the violence against women. In recent years, we've seen a proliferation of UN agency conferences that call on UN member states to make new commitments. And I'm thinking of the Nairobi Summit and the Generation Equality Forum, which among other controversial issues promotes a humanitarian right to abortion. Rebecca, could you speak to the Generation Equality Forum, please? It's sponsored by UN Women, the new commitments, the purpose, the outcome.
Yeah, I think it's good to sort of frame this in terms of the big pivotal conferences in the 1990s. So you had the ICPD, or International Conference on Population and Development, in 1994, and then the International Conference on Women that was held in Beijing in 1995, and the large programs of action, large agendas that were agreed to by the member states at those conferences that have been carried out, through the UN system and through the agencies ever since. And specifically, UNFPA has sort of been the ones that meant to sort of shepherd the ICPD agenda, and UN Women is now the one that sort of inherited the Beijing agenda. And initially they had 5- and 10-year reviews of these pivotal conferences that were conducted by the member states, and where the outcome was an agreed negotiated document. And those were relatively clean. Certainly they didn't go beyond really the problems that were, still there in the originals. But in more recent years, probably out of frustration at that lack of progress, these agencies and their donors have really shifted their model toward a much less accountable, something not involving the need for consensus by member states. And so they've been hosting these, in the last couple of years, it was the 25th anniversary of both conferences. And so the Generation Equality Forum was to commemorate the Beijing conference, and the Nairobi Summit in 2019 to commemorate ICPD. And in both of these cases, the respective agencies sort of hosted a large summit where there was no agreed outcome involving consensus at all, but rather they opened up the doors for any member state who wanted to make a commitment or a pledge. Also, donors could donate, money, or could state that they were going to be doing this, in line with the intentions of these conferences. And so, to the extent that there was any written output at all, it was completely, whatever the individual donor or member state wanted to say, or what the agency wanted to say, essentially. And so there's, there's language, obviously that's come out of this. The Nairobi Summit, for example, UNFPA included the controversial phrase sexual and reproductive health and rights, or SRHR, which has never been agreed by the General Assembly, and which, to the extent that it has a definition, definitely includes abortion and sexual rights. And of course, these conferences are going to bring in a lot of donations by wealthy countries who have already been basically setting the agenda for these agencies, but also they, they provide sort of almost a guilt mechanism for countries that may not be on board with what other countries want, but they still feel the need to make pledges as well and sort of get their buy-in, at least at some level. And so it really decentralizes what the agenda is away from those poorer countries who are the most conservative as well. And, sort of, again, makes it look as though there's a mandate even when there isn't one.
And I believe many of these recipient countries, as you said, actually stayed away from the conference. They even tried to called meetings with the agencies to try to understand more of the processes, and they were largely ignored.
And even from the civil society aspect, it has been said by people who are huge proponents of SRHR that these conferences are what they call champions only spaces. And so they've been set up, especially, this is even easier under pandemic conditions, but to sort of keep, pro-life, pro-family groups out entirely, or keep them on the sidelines so that they can't make their voices heard either.
Right, that's right. Stefano, would you like to add anything to that as far as more on the legal side of things?
Yeah, no, basically that these conference outcomes don't have any legal status outside what the agencies do with them. I mean, so they're not binding on states. They're not even political commitments by states, official political commitments in the context of the General Assembly, for example, like these intergovernmentally negotiated outcomes. But the way that they become troubling is if they are incorporated bureaucratically in the work of the agencies. And that's what we saw, for example, with the Nairobi outcome, just like the Generation Equality Forum, just like the Istanbul Summit. These were all conferences that were organized by UN agencies or the Secretariat outside of the context of the General Assembly and intergovernmental negotiations. And they had a predetermined outcome. And there are ongoing attempts to incorporate these outcomes that were never negotiated and adopted openly and transparently like other UN agreements. There are attempts to incorporate them bureaucratically and programmatically in the work of the agencies. And we saw this with the Nairobi Summit 2 years ago now, when the executive board of UNFPA, the UN Population Fund, included an indicator to measure progress on the International Conference on Population and Development, an indicator that included the Nairobi Summit. And, for those who don't know, the Nairobi Summit promoted not only an open definition of sexual and reproductive health that includes LGBT issues, it also promoted the idea that abortion is a humanitarian right, which is one of the newest frontiers for abortion advocates. Since they failed to establish a human right to abortion, they're going in the most difficult situations and humanitarian situations and disasters, arguing that abortion is a right in those situations.
So we are coming down to like our last 5 minutes here, and I really want to spend a little bit more time on UNFPA. It's a problematic agency. We all know and have heard of its complicity in China's one child policy. It's the reason why under Republican administrations, the U.S. cuts off funding to UNFPA. So if we could spend the next 5 minutes just focusing a little bit more on specific examples of that agency.
Well, obviously UNFPA is always going to be one of the most problematic on the abortion issue because it is the agency that describes itself as the sexual and reproductive health agency of the UN. And so to the extent that that definition includes abortion or is interpreted as including abortion, that's where a lot of the problems are going to be. Certainly UNFPA has taken a lot of criticism from its cooperation back in the days of the one-child policy in China. They gave their first population award to the family planning minister of China, as well as to the prime minister of India, who under the emergency basically suspended human rights, and there was a lot of forced sterilization. So some of the most egregious population control movements were given the nod by UNFPA in its early days. Now they're often somewhat subtle in their ways of promoting abortion because they know that they'll take a lot of heat for that. But again, it's so much of it comes down to the family planning movement, the groups that they partner with, the funding that goes to those groups. And a lot of that happens through this concept called the unmet need for family planning. One of UNFPA's 3 sort of transformational goals is to eliminate the unmet need for family planning, which is defined officially as being, those who are not currently using a family planning method and have said on a survey that they would prefer not to have a child in the very near future. Now, you'll notice there's no part of that definition that says that they want to use it or that they can't access it. And in fact, data from the Guttmacher Institute, which of course is a pro-abortion think tank, have said that only about 5% of women with a so-called unmet need actually can't access family planning. This is from the women themselves. Nevertheless, UNFPA often treats unmet need as equivalent to lack of access. And so, there is no way that you could have zero unmet need unless you force a lot of women to override their religious views, their concerns about their health, their human rights in so many different respects. And yet, by framing it as a human rights violation that these women have an unmet need, they bring in a lot of money. It was notable that, even under the former President Trump, when he cut off funding to UNFPA, as some Republican presidents have done, that the head spokesperson of UNFPA was bragging that they have more money than ever, because of course they're getting it through others, especially, the EU. And so, obviously the groups that they partner with include Planned Parenthood, Marie Stopes, and others. And so, they are integral to the pro-abortion movement, even if they try to downplay their involvement.
This is what I like to call the UN population funds dirty little secret. And that is that all the money it receives, which is almost $1 billion a year at its peak 3 or 4 years ago, all this money is not actually going to purchasing commodities and services that are needed or in demand, but it's actually money going to convince women in poor countries to have smaller families. It's convincing women who want a large family, who want more children, not to have more children. Because in actual fact, the indicator Rebecca's research shows over the years has remained constant. No matter how much money is thrown at family planning internationally through the UN agency, the actual indicator for unmet need has remained constant. It's almost unchanged. And the one about access is actually the same also. In a sense, the world is saturated with contraceptives. They're widely available, they're affordable. People who want them have ways of accessing them. And the dirty little secret of the population establishment broadly, which isn't just UNFPA, but it's, the Population Council, the foundations like Rockefeller and MacArthur that work on this, as well as the Gates Foundation, as well as the U.S. Agency for International Development and the reproductive health section of the population section of our USAID. Their dirty little secret is that all the money that they're getting and appropriating through Congress is not actually helping serve women's needs. It's to convince women not to have children.
And it helps the problematic abortion groups set up a foothold in pro-life countries where while they're there, they can agitate and help to change pro-life laws. It's hugely problematic. So closing thoughts, what can we do to save these UN agencies? If we'll go there for a couple minutes and then I think we'll have to close.
Well, one of the commenters in the chat box was saying, can't we just disband Unicef? Well, no, we're not that drastic. I mean, there is good work that Unicef carries out and can carry out, as well as other UN agencies. And I think there's not one single thing that we can do. There are a lot of things that must be done, beginning with educating the public, and this webinar, the work of CFAM, the work of many of those who participated and are listening to us now, to expose what UN agencies are doing, much like Alexis did with the UNICEF report on pornography, to make people aware so that there's pushback against this overreach. I think that's essential. And I think that's the number one task that we have on our hands, because so few people are aware of what's actually going on with UN agencies and the controversial work that they're doing. But aside from that, at the political level, a lot needs to be done at all levels. The diplomats need to have marching orders to oppose this kind of thing. Moreover, countries need to adopt laws to prevent their foreign assistance from being used to promote controversial issues that are not internationally agreed, like abortion. One of the things that I still don't understand is why, countries like Poland, Hungary, Malta, who have strong pro-life laws, don't adopt Mexico City policies of their own, prohibiting the use of their own foreign assistance to promote abortion, because that would have an outsized impact on EU foreign policy, which, for those of you who know or don't, it actually is. It's supposed to be consensual. So if these, even if they're small, but pro and less powerful pro-life countries within the EU bloc, if they were to adopt laws prohibiting the use of their foreign assistance to promote or perform abortions, much as we have in the Helms Amendment in Mexico City policy, it would block and prevent the European Union from taking positions in favor of abortion. And that would also stop UN agencies in many ways from promoting abortion, because the only reason these UN agencies are taking the positions they take is because of funding from the European Union and pressure from the European Union and their the countries that are influential within the EU bloc.
Anyone else? Closing thoughts? I think everybody has a role. I think those of you listening, educate your friends. Those of you in other countries, grassroots organizations, you have a huge impact that you can make on those in your government. So we thank you for joining us today. Next month, we will have a webinar that discusses the amicus brief that CFAM legal experts submitted to the Supreme Court on the Dobbs case. Stefano and Alexis will be with you, as well as our president, Austin Roos. So thank you so much. And we are very, very grateful for your support.
Thank you.